Jason Palmer, an editor of our Espresso daily briefing app, reports on the women's magazines with a difference.
Greet your husband with a smile when he comes and a smile when he goes.
Don't dabble in his work.
Make your house a paradise on earth.
Familiar words of wisdom from women's magazines of a certain time.
Prepare the food your husband loves, prepare his bed after that, and do what he wants.
But this isn't antiquated advice from a bygone era.
Can you imagine all the bloodshed and bones he sees every day? Your fussing only increases the pressure.
It's a new publication aimed at women in the Middle East. It's called Betuki, which translates to Your Home.
Weren't you thrilled when your husband told you he was going to join the Jihad for God, even though you knew that perhaps he might never return?
Nicholas Pelham, Middle East correspondent for The Economist, is here with us. Tell me what this Betuki is all about.
It's al-Qaeda's latest attempt to try and attract women to its cause. It's perhaps the oldest jihadist movement in the region. It's got some of the, if you're coming from a jihadist background, some of the best pedigree.
Well, tell me about it, because it sounds like a, let's call it an interesting publication. What does it look like? What's in it?
It could be a conservative women's magazine and not much. It's full of recipes which are really quite basic. The latest edition, which came out today, has a recipe for mashed potato. Previous recipes have been for sort of scrambled egg and tomatoes. And it's got sort of instructions as to how you should do the washing up and sort of what order you should do the washing up in. It's really sort of simpleton's guide for keeping the house clean. It comes across actually as surprisingly bourgeois. Pictures of dining rooms with sort of dining tables and nice chairs, sort of quite expensive jewellery, full of ribbons and love hearts and red padlocks engraved with love hearts.
Nicholas, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Elisabeth Kendall is an Arabic and Islamic studies expert at Oxford University. Hi there, Dr. Kendall.
Hi.
I'm interested to know what you think has pushed Al-Qaeda to produce this publication, this sort of very specialist magazine.
I think what Al-Qaeda fears is probably women becoming more active. This is not unusual in conflict zones. In fact, we saw it here in Britain during the First and Second World Wars, that conflicts empower women. Women are necessarily forced to enter the workplace, to take on the roles traditionally done by men. And after the wars end, after the conflict ends, it's quite difficult to put them back in their boxes. I think Al-Qaeda is making a big attempt to preempt that, to tell women, stay indoors.
This seems to stand in sharp contrast to the way Islamic State seems to be providing roles for women.
Yes, that's right. Islamic State, in October last year, did put out a message in its newsletter which said it's an obligation for women to fight jihad in every way possible. And that made it sound like they were saying that actually, now that we're on the back foot, now that Islamic State is being pushed back, our fighters are under pressure, women, it's okay for you now to take up arms too. But prior to that, Islamic State also had stressed that women should be more about supporting the jihadists and not about being on the front lines.
Well, I mean, the history of Islam has plenty of strong women, strong characters, women in powerful positions. Doesn't this create a conflict?
Well, there are examples, precedents from Islam in which women have taken up combat roles, and one of the most famous of those would be the Prophet's wife, Aisha herself, one of his wives. She actually went into combat with the rebel army in the Battle of the Camel in the mid-7th century. But there are several different versions of that story. Some elements within Islam like to play it down. There's also a woman called Nusayba bint Ka'b, who took up arms to defend the Prophet Muhammad in one of Islam's earliest battles, as the men were, in fact, deserting him. But in both those cases, you could argue that that was a needs-must situation, that women weren't meant for combat, but under duress, they could enter combat. And that's the line that Islamic State was taking.
Right, and in Al-Qaeda's case, they are sufficiently confident that they, won't need to call up the female forces to keep women then as these domestic goddesses. I mean, some of this advice doesn't sound particularly nuanced, actually.
I think it's simply a red line that Al-Qaeda doesn't want to cross. And actually, Al-Qaeda did put out a document in September 2016, when 3 women were arrested in Paris for planning an Islamic State operation, saying that this was inappropriate and telling off the Islamic State for allowing women to take active combat roles. In fact, it didn't tell off the women themselves. It told off men for allowing that to happen and said, actually, it's appropriate for women to stay at home, to support the jihadists, but not to be in active combat because it compromises their honor. Al-Qaeda also has social media wire, which it puts out for women, and it answers some of the questions that you can imagine women being interested in, but it answers them from a very male perspective. So, for example, what do women get in paradise if men get 72 virgins? The answer is the women are prettier, and you're of a higher status than the virgins, so written very much from a male point of view. There's another question that was answered in January, which was, how should you react if your husband decides to take a second, third, or fourth wife? And the arguments that are put forward include gems like, well, don't worry, your husband might cheer up as a result and therefore treat you better. Or think about it this way, you get to share the housework with her. So again, written from a very male perspective.
Not unlike the recipes that we heard about.
No, exactly.